Everybody hear me? So I opened up a bunch of RFCs last night that are split out from the original remove stacks RFC. Let me share my screen. So these three, I think a bunch of people here have had time to add comments to them. Maybe I'll go through them really quickly and see if people have questions. Actually, I'm going to start with this one. So the first one basically just removes the stack and mixin concept and renames stacks to base images and replaces mixins with just a CycloneDX formatted list of packages on the base images. Moves to kind of standardized metadata for matching against stacks. It's an example of like what it looks like to define compatibility with different images for a build pack, and also this kind of introduces multi-architecture build packs, or would let you build a manifest index from a build pack that works on different architectures when you pull it. Yeah.
I have a like general question about the set of RFCs.
Mm-hmm.
How do they play a role in the ongoing work with stack build packs as a whole, right? Like there was a set of there was a pre-existing RFC that said like stack build packs are going to work this way, and the implementation team, I believe, broke it down and said, this is what we're going to start working through, and this is like our projected completed period. It seems like some of this definitely plays a part in that part of it. So I am curious to know, like, maybe at a high level, what the expectation or maybe like the form of moving forward looks like in regards to stack build packs as a whole.
I think these defer stack build packs or any additional functionality aside from an escape hatch. You can use Docker files to extend your base images until after we deliver something more simple, and then we can come back and consider if we need a more complex abstraction that could involve generating Docker files, could involve using the same APIs we created different ways, or making that interface more generic. Could involve a build kit front end that's different from Dockerfile, but that we support like Docker files that lets you add OS packages. But I think it's easier to start from a place of like, let's deliver this simple baseline functionality and then revisit stack packs later. So I don't know if that means we want to withdraw stack pack RFCs if people like this direction instead, or want to go this direction first, or defer them officially somehow. But I would imagine that we would put down that work, do something simple that we could deliver more quickly first, and then come back later and see if we get some feedback on that, and see if we need more a richer API there.
Okay, so by I guess approving or accepting these RFCs, it would be pretty disruptive to the ongoing work of stack build packs that's currently happening, right? Or the trajectory, at least.
Fully disruptive. Yes.
And I think the lifecycle team is aware of that and has sort of like put on pause changes that are just for stack build packs from this next release.
Cool. Any more questions?
I only have that question about introducing CycloneDX in this RFC versus something else. I mean, if the point is simply to replace mixins and stacks, I think we can do that with just pearls and this new like distribution thing, platform thing, and that would give us the exact equivalent. I think a CycloneDX thing is an addition. It's not an alternative.
That's your question, right? Same as
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So I think there's a decision to make, which is like, should we have a separate list that's permanently used to match packages, right? If we decide that's the direction we want to go, then yes, CycloneDX I think could come out of this one. But if we don't want a separate list, if we want it to be one thing, I don't want to create another intermediary format that we have to support forever in the middle of it. And so it's like, you know, I kind of thought about that, like at least this one doesn't have to be coupled to it, but in the end, if we wanted one list of packages in one format and not have to switch to one format and then change to the format again in the future and deal with all the compatibility stuff, I thought this was the right path forward. I lean against creating a separate list with the same information, just because I think CycloneDX is not, it's just a JSON list. I don't think it's that, you know, hard to parse. And like, I'm not convinced that we need to duplicate the data, but I'm not very strongly opinionated about this. I wouldn't let it block if others felt, you know, that we really should keep a separate list of pearls there. I just, given that I'm not convinced the separate list of pearls could go on a label. I think it could be too long. So we might have to move that into a separate layer also. It makes me feel like, okay, we're already going to have to grab a digest, download a blob, open it up, open a file. Now we're talking about like there are two files, and one is a JSON flat list, and the other is a more complex object that's also JSON list that has the same information. And so, but I, you know, if people feel otherwise, I'm not very strong opinion about it.
I mean, are you imagining that people would put everything there in that, like if they're not using CycloneDX, for example, they're manually crafting it out and trying to replace the mixins that they currently have? Wouldn't they just put the additional things that they think go in there? Like if you're just taking an existing stack with mixins and you're trying to convert it to this format, I think the easiest thing would be to take that stack, convert it to that platform distribution thing, take your mixins and find the equivalent URLs for it, and that's it.
I think right now our mixin interface is like really not what this suggests. So right now mixins are additional packages on top of the base image, right? And there's some special secret definition of Ubuntu Bionic. There's no way to go from current, and they also have prefixes that are different, right? I don't think there's any way to conveniently go from current mixins to this format. And I think if we're going to make people change the format, then the nicest thing we can do is use CycloneDX, because then they can just run a tool against their image that spits out the exact thing they need in the right format and then paste that on the thing, as opposed to having to figure out how to parse their app database, pull out just the package names, remove things that have the wrong prefixes, whatever, right? The goal was like, or part of, I think a benefit of CycloneDX is that it makes that migration process easier. And we don't have to create tooling for it, like we would have to do probably for a flat list of Perl packages.
Does it make sense to have a minimum, I guess, set of information that needs to be included? I mean, the CycloneDX format, as I understand, has quite a bit of stuff that a lot of is optional. Do we have a like subset of that that's required to be compliant?
I would say just the package names are required for this RFC. I don't want to create, I think the RFC around standardized metadata format would be a better place to assert that there are other things besides the Pro formatted package names. But I don't even know, as long as it's valid CycloneDX, I think we should be pretty open to allowing, you know, whatever, as long as there's an identifier that can be matched against for vulnerability sake. Like I think the two big uses of that SBOM are security, like matching for vulnerabilities, and open source compliance or just general license compliance. And so if you have the Perl identifier, I think you get both in most cases. You definitely get the security one. If you have that and a license in there, then you definitely get the open source license compliance stuff. The other fields are good for provenance and other things, but I kind of want that to stay out of this RFC, which just needs the format for matching against package URLs.
You could technically generate a valid CycloneDX SBOM that doesn't have pearls in it, right? If it used like CPEs instead or something like that. I'm on the fence here, but I'm like a little bit inclined to want to decouple like this stack validation stuff from the SBOM stuff, both from a like moving forward perspective, so we don't have a giant tree of dependencies from between our RFCs, but also to make life easier for platforms and other tooling so that not everyone needs to get a tool to parse CycloneDX to pull out the relevant information here.
I think it makes it harder for platforms and users if we have two formats, especially if we create another non-standard format, even if it's just a Perl list in JSON, because they have to generate that list somehow. There are already tools that exist to generate that list for CycloneDX.
I guess it depends on what you mean by platforms. I think it's not necessarily easier for Stack authors if we have a separate list, but it is easier for anyone who's consuming that data, right?
Well, I mean, there are tools to parse CycloneDX that exist, and there aren't tools to parse a list of
a JSON array. Like I think you
mean,
can do that, right?
I agree. If you're a platform and you're willing to pull the label and parse JSON on it, then and you know, platform isn't creating stacks; they're dealing with existing stacks. Then that format could be easier. I don't think it's much easier than a JSON formatted CycloneDX list, because it's also a list with Perl names in it. But I don't have a.
Yeah, I'm on the fence. I feel like we should be keeping these things separate. So if we ever wanted to, like change the BOM format, like a BOM is this nice to have that some people always do more thoroughly than others for traceability and licenses and vulnerability scanning, but I'm a little bit leery about making it an integral part of the behavior of a build. Something about that feels wrong to me, but I can't quite put my finger on why it's so much, it's like the same information we're pulling out, right? That's why I'm on the fence about it.
I kind of feel the opposite almost. It's like there's a big federal mandate around supply chain security. It's really bad if you use Buildpacks and you generate an image and it's missing dependencies in a thing you think can reliably be used to match against CVEs, right? We tie it into the API, it's going to be more right. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, so pearls in general are like they can be used both in SPDX and CycloneDX. So if we tie this to just pearls, we can in the future change the BOM format. We don't have to care, and this part remains the same. So the part where the stack provides its additions as pearls and where Buildpacks requests packages or like require certain packages as pearls, that would stay the same. It would be decoupled from how it's represented in a file, which is the BOM. So I guess you could also argue that if that happens in the future, the lifecycle could just take a look at the CycloneDX BOM and convert it to the SPDX one, whatever. But I don't know, it just feels like maybe this RFC should just say that Perl is the identifier for packages and then leave a separate thing for how this file is generated.
A separate RFC.
I mean, we need one anyway for the stack BOM thing, right? I was imagining that's where it would go. But because we still have to figure out how we use this BOM, right? We haven't figured that out yet, like how this would be used when you do a rebase operation or when you do a build operation, and how do you update the final BOM of the image?
We all have a general idea of what we want the stack BOM to be. It's like the run image starts with a BOM, and then we add other things to it. And when we rebase, we fix it, but we haven't worked out all the details yet, right?
Rebasing is interesting because we need to preserve the Buildpack layers in a separate file, right? For sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, rebasing is a good one. I should go in there. I'm okay with blocking. So this one's blocking the other two. I'm okay with blocking this one on the BOM one if we feel like we need to decide for Cyclone first. But I want to talk about that like what if we change the format? Because we're telling build pack authors this is the format, and you have one format, and this is what you're supposed to output. Because otherwise, any build pack that doesn't output it, spoils the bomb, right? Or if it chooses to use a different format, you're just never going to get the data you want. I think we say yes, everything outputs in CycloneDX, but I like the way you've kind of orchestrated the other RFC, or the architecture for how what the file names look like and everything, because it means we could introduce another format in the future, right? But we would control how that's introduced. So we could say you can do SPDX, but CycloneDX is still mandatory. Or you could do Cyclone and we'll convert it to SPDX, or maybe even the other direction. But as a project, we can control how those additional formats are introduced, and not kind of create this thing where you never get a valid SBOM at the end because you're orchestrating, because one of your 30 build packs doesn't output in the same format, right? Or maybe it's okay, we let build packs do that, but we'll convert in some directions in the future, right? And that'd be a way to control it also. So I like the direction the other one's going, but I think because it lets us control that rollout, I'm not worried about coupling, like it changing and this not working in the future, right? I'm not worried about coupling the package database to the package database, essentially.
From what I can see, we could also, yeah. I mean, if we, I think what would be nice if we could show users a minimal example of a CycloneDX SBOM that we expect. I think it would be fairly easy to construct. You just need the version number, and then for each of these dependencies, you need like an object with the identifier, which is the Perl, and that's it. I think everything else is optional. So it's just a list of objects with Perls. So if we just put that there, I think that would help convert some of the other folks over.
I like that plan because it's then we're not coupling it to CycloneDX, we're just coupling it to some JSON that happens to look like this. That will work with the CycloneDX in the future should we move forward, and then it doesn't block. So that's not a bad idea.
The only thing that would be like, you still need the CycloneDX like version number and like API version stuff at the top, but like the rest of the thing is just a list of objects with Perls. So
Gives us free schema or this object. Sorry.
But I think that would maybe help.
That. Put a note here.
Because I think that would also help, like when we write the migration guide, we can tell people here are your mixins, even if you don't want to use the CycloneDX tool. This is the minimal format you have to convert to, which it is technically just a list of objects in JSON with one additional field. So it should be, and that should be the minimal thing we validate against. So that would be a good migration path, and also, yeah.
Cool.
If we're done on that topic, I had just a clarification on the sample that was above.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could just like walk through that and like explain what that would entail. Like if a Buildpacks set that, what would that mean for its compatibility?
Yeah, so this, it's kind of explained up here, but more vaguely, basically each entry in platforms creates a new separate build pack image that's part of a manifest index. The OS and the so OS is like Linux, architecture is like the machine architecture, and then there's a name of a district. Then optionally below that, these are mandatory, right? Optionally below that, for that, this creates a single image, right? This image is compatible with Ubuntu, and then in the case of 18.04, requiring these packages in the build image. And 2004, and in the case of 2004, requiring these packages in the base image. But this is just one image that gets created. And this is another x86 Linux image. I know Emily had a question about that. That also works for Ubuntu, but always requires these packages on both 1404 and 1604 without having to specify the list of packages twice, because they're the same between those distributions. I made up that 2004 has a special curl2 package. It doesn't. Don't go look at that.
Okay, so I think that's more clear. I was just trying to envision how that would work if I need to specify, you know, particular needs, and if things are more generic, then you just leave off the distro version things.
Maybe this could be called images, and it would be more clear or something like that.
So if you want the packages stuff, you have to list that. I assume that key is only available under versions because packages can change across versions, right?
It's available under
Oh.
distros also, in case your distro has the same package names for all of its versions. Like in this example, 1404 and 1604, I pretended that they have the same curl package, and so you can just assert across both of them, so you don't have to repeat it. But say in 1804 and 2004, the package is different. You can specify different lists, and they'll combine.
Is that distro name required? Like if I had a Debian package, you know, that would work for both Debian and Ubuntu.
Oh, like this up here?
Yeah.
That's so Emily had a question about ID like, where like maybe if, because Debian and Ubuntu do share some package names, should you be able to, you know, have an entry here that's like name like, right, and then Debian, and then it'll match against the name ID like field in OS release and let you do that. So that could be one way we could solve that. But otherwise, no, I didn't envision the distributions would have similar enough package names that you wouldn't have to repeat it.
Okay. I don't see it as a big issue. Just I was curious in terms of that.
Perls encode some of that information, like in the, like they encode the type, and they also encode the code like the source, right? Because curl in Ubuntu is actually different than curl in Debian, right? And so it, you know, I don't know how much it buys us, but they don't include, you know, encode Ubuntu, the specific version of Ubuntu.
Yeah, I think where I've seen it more is with like commercial software. Some companies would publish just one thing for, and they'll call it Debian, you know, but it's works for Debian, it works for Ubuntu, anything Debian like.
It's really statically linked things like that usually.
Yeah.
Probably use Buildpack. I don't know, maybe not, because they just distribute as a package. Yeah, that's a good point. Might have to repeat it then.
Yeah, which isn't a big issue.
Yeah, it feels like it's safer to repeat, and you can add the like thing if it becomes an issue later, just because it's easier to go from more explicit to less explicit than the other way around.
I'd be happy to tag like on top of this because it is supported in OS release if we need it in the future.
Are these distro lists that you're getting from names standardized somewhere from one of the tools that you're using?
Yes, so that's not even from a tool, it's from the things themselves. So up here, maybe I should move to the commentless version for a second, that might be easier. So up here, all these fields are canonicalized against OS release, or at least these two are OS release and these two are kind of the standard, and I use the ones from Go, you know, architecture and OS names. So that's the OS release on any Linux distribution. It gives you an ID that's really consistent and a version ID that's also really consistent.
For what it's worth, the Go sort of enum values for Go Arch and Goose are also what's in the OCI spec for OS and Arch. So it's not just the Go conventions, also matches what OCI conventions are.
I think OCI got them from Go, but you know, it's a standardized list. Should I put OCI in there also for this? Because I
Yeah,
agree.
I think it'd probably be easier to do the OCI one just based off of feedback from the. I mean, I don't really care where the list comes from, but I do think they're just trying to get away from we just do things that because Go doesn't. There's the sentiment of like having to be a Go expert. In practice, I guess the list doesn't change, but feels better to align with the container ecosystem than some programming language per se.
Makes sense.
I'm sorry, I missed the very beginning of that, but in the OCI spec itself, it basically just says go see Go Arch and Goose. So it's like the OCI spec is linking out to the Go values for this.
I can still put OCI in there. It's fine with me. Or when we spec, we can do that.
Would it be worth making like the name thing, like if you just have packages you need and you don't care about the distribution, is there a way to specify like alternative packages? Like I don't care whether curl comes from Ubuntu or Debian, I just want one of them, and then I don't. Does that make sense?
Well, because
So,
the
like,
it's hard because the package URL has the thing in it, and so I don't think that would work either way.
I was so this thing is not PRLs, right? This is something we invented to match against PRLs.
Technically, okay, so that's what I thought at first. Emily and I had this long chat about whether you can use package URLs to query things. And so technically they're valid package URLs because the version in package URLs is optional. Now the intent of that version being optional originally I thought wasn't for querying, that it was for, sometimes things don't have versions and you have to use qualifiers to describe them, which are also optional. But there are issues open up on package URL with maintainers who talk about like, the ability to use wildcards in Perl URLs. They clearly feel like it is a thing that you can use to match, which I didn't expect. I was like, Emily had convinced me that we shouldn't do this until I saw that issue and said, no, they really are thinking about it like that. And so then I went back to actually, I think Perl URLs without versions are perfect for here and they are valid.
So if we just replace Ubuntu with package deb wildcard curl, would that just work?
That's an interesting idea. The wildcard isn't supported in Perl yet, though, so that's not a valid thing until.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying like, for this particular table, the buildback normal table, do we need them to specify polls? For the generated stuff, I get it. This is something that people would manually put, right? And this is up to us to parse. So
I would prefer if these were valid package URLs that are used to query, because that seems like a thing they talk about upstream. But if people feel strongly that these should be a little bit more extended to support wildcard matching on the distribution, and we need a way to generically match something across distributions, I would be okay with that. But I think I'd prefer ID like instead of appear, right? Along with that, instead of not specifying the distribution. The not specifying the distribution seems, it's like I have very little. You could convince me maybe that Debian and Ubuntu curl should be called curl because this, this package comes from here and it's inherited by this and built over here, and that makes sense. But between Ubuntu and Fedora, that curl is going to be the same.
But like between Fedora, CentOS, and stuff, I would imagine them.
They have an ID like they're actually. I don't know about Fedora, but at least
I think they're all ID like Fedora.
Even Red Hat Enterprise Linux is ID like Fedora.
I was looking at UBI, and UBI actually says it's rel if you look in the ID. There's nothing about it that lets you know it's different from normal rel, and then it's ID like Fedora.
So ID like seems like it buys us that. But then if we need to add the ID like and the wildcard matching here, especially if they do upstream wildcards at some point, be great. But even if they don't, then we can do it if we needed to.
I think ID like could be useful, but I'm sort of interested on punting on it for the first version because I'm thinking about, what we put in the platform fields of these images and how we pull them down. And there's like very canonical ways to do this for OS version, and therefore select the image you want out of the manifest. But like we'd have to use, it's not as obvious how to do it for like ID like what field in the platform section of the manifest list we would populate there.
It'd be very easy to tag all of this on top of the current RFC, even if somebody wanted to open an RFC, pointing at this RFC before this one is through that says we should do this. I would be supportive of that. I'm just want to get consensus on the basic thing first. This already adds more functionality than what we already have, right? Right now you have to specify the list.
It'd be like IO, my special org, stacks, Deb, Debian, right? It's like, this is definitely already better.
Yeah.
We're 38 minutes through, still on the first one. If people still have big questions about this one, really happy to keep going, but also just want to, as a time check, we can move on to the Docker file one because I know the stack pack stuff in there may be a little more, may also generate some big questions.
The last thing I sort of wanted to see in this is what we're going to do with assets. Because we built stack fields into the assets in Buildpack Toml when we approved asset packages. Like, do we then replace that with a platform? So we move them under different platforms? Do we have a top level and then different ones for particular platforms?
Have we implemented assets yet?
It's not shipped yet, but there's at least some implementation in the lifecycle. I don't know what the state of it in pack is.
We're talking about, changes to caching, so we don't have like 5 different types of cache. I feel like changes to the asset bundle thing and the getting rid of some of the complexity there maybe.
Yeah, I think there's
some little like
some really good things in there, but I've started to have existential worries that, as we've talked about simplifying things, that at least moving assets around in their own images, like I think we made it too complex to solve too many problems as well, just like we did with several other things.
So I could put something in here that's like, and assets will be part of this too, or this was what it could look like to integrate current assets into it. But I also like,
I'm sort of curious in hearing from someone who's been working on pack what the state of assets in pack is, though.
We have those sort of individuals here.
I don't know. I mean, there's a couple platform team maintainers here.
I know. I feel like the eyes are on me, but I have not.
Joe too. Joe's a platform team maintainer, isn't he? No.
No, I think Steven's the other platform team
Steven's a platform team maintainer.
keep telling people to remove me from that list.
All I'm saying is I took myself off that list, so I don't have to answer this question. Yeah.
So it seems like maybe there hasn't been much ongoing work on that one. I don't know how much it matters.
I think if we don't want to do exactly what's in there now, it will affect the lifecycle release. I feel bad for the lifecycle team because like ripping out all the things we told them to ship, but it's probably the right thing to do if we're going to change it. I think we need to talk about asset packages, and that is a whole different conversation, I guess.
Yeah, so if the question is in general, like what the status of asset packages are, there's two aspects to it. There's the work that was necessary on Pack to actually provide that functionality. Most of which, if I recall correctly, is complete, right? Dan put a lot of effort into getting that to a finalized state. The only hangup that I recall was essentially the other part of it, which is the changes to the life cycle, the very minor changes to the life cycle, and letting that pass through there through the spec and all that.
We haven't shipped the Buildpack tunnel or distribution specs yet.
Right.
But I guess we implemented it optimistically. Did we ship it?
Yes. No, we didn't ship it. It should be in this release. But I could double check.
Dan is no longer working on this, right? Like he's not contributing to the project anymore. So he wouldn't be there.
That's right. So if my understanding is correct, I believe Anthony was taking up some of that effort that was remaining. But again, I can't really speak to that.
Yeah, I did gather a lot of context from Dan before he took his absence. For asset packages, what you said kind of is pretty much accurate. Whether he'll be contributing or not, so far it doesn't look like it's the case, right?
Would you want to spend some time with maybe Emily and I to kind of scope out what asset packages could look like moving forward? If you're picking it up from Dan.
Absolutely, right. I'm just saying from I also want to know that it is of value to people other than Dan as well, right? Like if that's the case, like some of the other issues that he was partaking in, absolutely. Those other ones I'm spearheading, I'm taking ownership of. This one in particular, I haven't really heard anybody speak about it other than him. So that's sort of the missing piece for me.
I think the idea would just be to reevaluate complexity given the kind of new direction of stack packs and things like that, and figure out if it still makes sense for, given that we're going to introduce another mechanism of caching that kind of looks like it too, figure out if it still makes sense or if there's simplifications we want to make before we kind of move forward, and then propose another RFC, go through the, get consensus on that, and then decide whether we, that RFC supersedes the previous one or whether we do what we originally thought, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What I don't want to do is merge the stack thing without ever talking about or fixing that, and then ship it in pack and then rip it out as soon as we ship it. Like, I thought to just get our ducks in a row here rather than sort of just leaving it as a big open-ended question.
I want to call a time check again. We got 15 minutes left. Anything on any other burningly critical questions on this before we move on to Docker files? Cool. Support Docker files. So this one introduces kind of Docker files at 3 levels. Standardizes Docker files for creating a stack, and also like proposes some tooling that would help you create a stack using those Docker files. Excuse me. It lets you use Docker files to extend stacks and proposes what the tooling looks like around that. And I think the key feature is it lets an application developer, if their platform allows it, put Docker files in their after, do a pack build, and have Docker files execute before the build to give them a customized build and or run image. Dan has some really good points here about security. I have some examples of Docker files in here if people are interested. There's really good questions from Charles at Red Hat, who said he can make the next working group, but not the ones today. I really like how he's kind of digging into this. I know, Joe, this is kind of the one that targets stack packs most directly. So especially interested if where your head is.
Yeah, no, I'm super supportive of exploring this. I think I mentioned yesterday in just another chat. I think when I first proposed stack packs, I actually called it root build packs. It was about a year and a half ago. And the intent was actually very similar to this. But I, at that time, wasn't comfortable having like a Dockerfile support or integrating with Dockerfile. And I think that had a lot to do with optics and where we sat in the ecosystem. A year and a half later, after understanding what it takes to do stack packs right, and a change in our maturity and how we're perceived in the ecosystem, where I think people look at Buildpacks today and say, how does Buildpacks fit in with everything else? Not like, do I choose it or something else? I think that's what makes it possible for us to explore this today. I think, I think in the earlier RFC, I'd asked about, what if we supplemented this with sort of the original root build pack idea where bin build just runs as root and there's nothing else to go with it. And I'm pulling back from that because I actually think the challenge there is perception about what kind of guarantees you have. If it is going to be if you're going to have a bin build like that, I think you're implying that rebase works. I think you're implying the various things about layers, and maybe there's a day where we talk about that again. Maybe there's a day where we still do stack packs or something like it. But I think right now this is the right direction.
Yeah, I like the approach of like add an escape hatch, make it look like we're integrating more into the ecosystem, and then come back later. And if we do need to provide functionality that has some of those guarantees in a limited way, we'll have a lot more data on how people are using it. And we won't be blocking people. Right now they're all the time get, hey, I can't use build packs for my app. I guess I'm going to go to Docker files, right? And the reasons aren't the app isn't a good app for build packs. It's like, it's a lot of work to set up a pipeline. And it's a Docker file that continually extends a base image, whatever. I really just want to say image magic here, if that makes sense. Giving people the ability to do that, seems good.
I did have one question. I know you responded, but I didn't have a chance to look at it. The gen package thing. I think I asked why that wasn't optional, and can you just kind of cover that?
There was that.
You said something about app images versus.
I don't know if that was in this or maybe it was in the previous one. I forget where.
I thought it was here.
You did have a comment on gen packages. I definitely remember that.
Yeah, TLDR is, you used the word must, and I thought that implied it was required. And I think your response was that it wasn't actually required.
Yeah, I think maybe it was in the other one. It's right here, right? The must you're talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was in the other one because I remember I said stack bunch, or maybe it was in an earlier version of this one. This said stacks everywhere, and I replaced it with image instead. Because
oh, that's what happened. Yeah, you pushed commit, and it's outdated now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it is optional, but it's optional. You still have to acknowledge that you're skipping something. So it's supposed to output a cyclone-dx formatted list of packages. It can just no op if you want to, but I didn't want to make it so that you can make a stack and have no idea that even though all the other tooling around you is contributing metadata, you're a whole bunch of stuff is going to get missed. The reason it's an executable is so that when you apply the app-specific Docker files or extensions, people don't have to worry about this at all. Only the original stack author has to care about it, and they can care about it by grabbing tooling from the project that understands the distribution and how to generate the cyclone-dx listing.
Okay.
So it's like absolutely.
Okay. Oh, so go down. Yeah, I get it. Go down to your example real quick.
Yeah.
So the first example is the OG base image, right?
Exactly. And this,
but that still takes base image as or that's just an arbitrary arg, then not necessarily one that's.
It takes base image as an arg because I made all of the Docker files in every case have exact.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, I get it. And then the one below it is a app provided Docker file that would extend the one above it.
This.
Potentially.
Yes, this is an app provided one, exactly. that
Okay.
mentions this
I get it. I get it.
one app developer has to do. And this uses the build ID feature, so you can say like it gets reinstalled every time. It doesn't get cached. And it says it's rebasable, which I probably shouldn't have put in there because this is the apt example. I think I meant to switch these. Yeah, these are supposed to be swapped. This was supposed to be rebasable, and this is not. Yeah, that's a mistake.
I feel like if one of the goals here, especially if we're going to do the Cyclone DX thing rather than a flat list of packages, is one of the goals is like, yeah, you can just run existing Cyclone DX tooling. Like, do we want to make people copy this in? Like, maybe we should come load this in, we should do more, but maybe, you know, we should provide a thing that runs these Docker files and generates the Cyclone DX at the end instead of leaving it as an exercise in the Docker file.
Yeah, so I imagine that there'll be a pack create stack command that's used when you're creating or extending stack images, right? And that it'll take these Docker files as input, and that this gen packages thing will make available for distributions through the project, or will publish locations, an easy binary you can grab to do this. If we wanted pack create stack to automatically copy that at the end, either with a flag or automatically if it's not there, if it can detect it based on OS release, I am totally supportive of that. That sounds like a great user interface for PackDat.
I think you might want to consider like making that gen packages not overwritable from the app specific images. That way someone who's creating the stack can supply that and make sure that no one's tampering with it at the app level.
I think that's kind of impossible in some ways, because they're in the end it's a Docker file running as root, right? So there's not much we could take a checksum of it ahead of time and make sure it doesn't change. But I feel a little bit like at the point where you can control anything in the image, maybe even if we take a checksum of it, they could set LD preload to replace it with different code, right?
Yeah, it's true.
It's not a solvable security problem. You could make something that tries to prevent you from doing that, but also in your app specific Docker file, maybe you install Nix, and then you install Nix packages, and you want gen packages to execute the Ubuntu gen packages and then the Nix gen packages afterwards to work together there. I don't see a reason to restrict the flexibility of subsequent Docker files being able to understand an even more complicated base image, given that the Docker file could have added additional things to it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Maybe a warning or something of, when it does change. I feel like stuff like that is going to be more desirable to control top down. That's, I guess, what I'm driving at.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the most common cases, this is something that nobody has to think about. You pass some flag to pack create stack, or you by default pack create stack injects the binary into the stack image for you, and nobody ever thinks about it, right? That is something that project handles entirely for you. It's not, and in that sense, it is top down in that the original stack author definitely creates that binary, and nothing replaces it unless somebody replaces it really explicitly in a Docker file that's running as root.
What about the case where someone removes packages? How does that?
It works, because if they remove packages, it still gets rerun at the end of every Docker file, and it generates a brand new one that's completely descriptive of the image and that replaces the previous one.
I see. Okay. So the stack one, so they would be kind of run in sequence, but then at the end is when you would capture that bomb information.
Right. Yeah. Or if you made one that had an original list on it, it would run at the end and stamp a thing on it. If you made an extended version of it, it would rerun it and replace it. If you did an app specific one, it would use the output of the app specific Docker files gen packages and not the earlier ones.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I do think that kind of goes into the comment ahead about security too. It's like the app specific stuff's going to run last, and you're now allowing it to basically override all of that.
I mean, if your platform allows app specific Docker files, all
True.
bets are off. Is
True.
my thing. It is a you're past that step, right? I'd imagine that like maybe a platform like Kpack would have a different interface for this that's more operator centric, a different CRD for extending things, or at least a switch on image that is off by default for allowing app specific Docker files.
So there's nothing in here for Buildpacks to control this, right? It's either the app developer or the stack.
That is the point. Yes.
Again, that's the point, but it also sort of breaks away from what we've been doing as a project with auto detection, and I think that to me is one of the key selling points for Buildpacks, that you don't have to write these things. And now
You could imagine how you could take these primitives and build that on top, though, right? It's like if your Buildpack outputs a list of pearls that you could generate it's like, oh, it needs 3 RPMs. Let me generate a Docker file that installs them. I feel like you can go from here to there, right?
But this would run before Buildpacks are run, right? There's no way for Buildpacks to communicate here.
I think if you use the previous RFC that we were looking at as a Buildpack author, you could state what you require, and then perhaps you could publish a base stack or something that folks could use that has that.
I feel like in general, yes, in this RFC, we're running it first with the app specified extensions, but because it's actually a totally separate thing that isn't deeply wound into everything else, you could really be very flexible with it.
I mean, whatever is running this Docker build, couldn't it just run a random binary that installs the packages? It has to run this, take this Docker file and run whatever instructions are there. If it just executed a specific binary in the stack after detect, that would solve a lot of problems before running whatever's in here. But that just brings us back to, I think, stack packs, right?
I think we're out of time. I want to.
Yeah.
It's an important thing to talk about because I don't feel like it's functionality that I think this has kind of already been said. I don't feel like it's functionality that shouldn't exist at all. Automated installation of packages with some interface. It's just, I think we spent like a year and a half discovering that Buildpacks are really good at operating at this layer. They provide a ton of value at that, strong contractual dependencies, runtimes and language modules on top of OS packages, right? And that OS packages are a really hard problem to solve, right? And so this tries to solve the easy problem that people have first, and then says we can come back later for the OS package problem if we really think we need to solve it. But no one has ever solved that problem. It's a much more generic problem in some ways, if that makes sense. And there aren't good solutions for it aside from distribution-specific package managers. And they're operating system packages are functions that operate across the whole file system. There's no way to rebase with them, right? They're just each package is an arbitrary change. So we should think about it more. But my goal was to put that as part of things we said we're not going to solve right now, put that out of scope, if that makes sense. But I don't think that it's something that we should never solve. Just, I don't think it's the right thing to solve now. And I think we need to talk about whether we should solve it. I really good job.
Yeah, I'll add that we what you described is the target we were trying to hit with stack packs. And I think what we've done here is change the target. You know, so like, it's not that you're like, everything you said, I have very similar feels, but it's a hard problem. And what Stephen's proposing, I don't think is, it's just not meant to solve that particular or that larger problem. So. I gotta drop
Thanks,
too.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.